You're joining us here inside of the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, looking down as the Orbit 2 team is controlling all of the systems operating on board this orbiting laboratory. Today, the team being led by Flight Director Jerry Jason, you can see there in the blue shirt. Joining him at the Capcom position, serving as the communication link between all of our teams down here on the ground and the astronauts up in space, is the Capcom Josh Matthew. And those astronauts up in space in the last week of Expedition 34. You can see the crew here. They're being led by NASA astronaut Kevin Ford there in the front row on the left. Behind him, the two Russian cosmonauts who will be returning back down to Earth with him later this week, Oleg Novitsky and Evgeny Turelkin. Rounding out our crew of Expedition 34 and remaining on board the station are Russian cosmonauts Roman Romanenko, Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, and then all the way on the right there, another NASA astronaut, Tom Marshburn. As mentioned, this is the final week of Expedition 34 on board the station. Currently engaged in a number of various science activities today, starting off with Commander Ford, who is currently inside of the Japanese Kibo module. He'll be working with the Spheres experiment throughout our update today and for a few hours today. That Spheres standing for the Synchronized Position, Hold, Engage, Reorient Experimental Satellites, are a system of satellites used to do various formation flying activities, providing a very unique opportunity on board station for these self-contained satellites to test out various algorithms, also creating three-dimensional models of various unknown objects in space. He'll be working with teams in MIT and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, on this Spheres Vertigo activity today. Aside from that, Ford will be doing a number of crew departure activities a little bit later, as again he's preparing to return back down to Earth with two Russian cosmonauts, Oleg Novitsky and Evgeny Turelkin. They'll be returning in their Soyuz TMA-06M spacecraft a little bit later this week, scheduled on Thursday evening Central Time. As always, we'll be bringing you live coverage of all of these events. You can see a timeline with things kicking off with farewell and hatch closure at 3:45 p.m. That undocking scheduled to take place from the station later at about 7:30, all setting up for the Soyuz crew landing in Kazakhstan, scheduled for 10:57 p.m. Central Time. So again, tune in a little bit later this week to follow along with the departure of our Expedition 34 astronauts. Also on board the station, one of those departing astronauts, Oleg Novitsky, also doing some crew departure work and stowing some items inside of the Soyuz vehicle. He'll also be completing his final cardiovascular conditioning training in advance of coming home a little bit later this week. Also, Evgeny Turelkin finishing up another biological experiment, collecting some blood and saliva samples that'll be brought back down inside the Soyuz vehicle. Also taking some microbial samples off of a number of the surfaces on board the station, just checking their nominal levels. Our third Russian cosmonaut, who will be remaining as part of the Expedition 35 crew, Roman Romanenko, is working to clear out some of the urine tanks and push them over into the Rodnik water tank in the 49 Progress vehicle, which will eventually be undocked from the station and deorbited a little bit later in the spring. He'll also be flushing out a few of the tank lines in the vehicle in preparation for all of those activities. He's also doing one of two radiation monitoring experiment works on board the station today, working with the Russian Matryoshka, named after the set of Russian nested dolls. He'll be reading some of the dosimeters and gathering the data from those. Meanwhile, current Expedition 34 flight engineer and future Expedition 35 commander Chris Hadfield was working on the cruise experiment, or the crew user interface system enhancement. A little bit earlier that he was inside of the Columbus module, you can see here. Aside from that, he was transferring some samples out of the Melfi, or the minus 80 degree laboratory freezer, one of the cryogenic freezers used on board the station for storing various biological research samples. He was also setting up the SLAM-D device, which is used for measuring body mass of these astronauts while in microgravity. The SLAM stands for the Space Linear Acceleration Mass Measurement Device. He'll also be collecting a number of detectors for the RADI-N, or the radiation dosimetry inside ISS, another radiation monitoring research project on board that looks to study neutron radiation and how much these astronauts are exposed to during long-duration spaceflight. Our final Expedition 34 astronaut Tom Marshburn transferring some samples from the Melfi over to the SpaceX glacial freezers on board the Dragon spacecraft. Dragon currently docked to the Earth-facing side of the Harmony node as one of 3 cargo craft currently docked to the International Space Station, and will be returning quite a variety of experiments and samples from ongoing research on board the station. Aside from that, Marshburn working on setting up the BRIC, or the Biological Research in Canisters experiment, which is a suite of hardware that looks to support a variety of different plant growth investigations on board the station. Also be doing a little bit of maintenance work on the water recovery management system, cleaning out and initiating the condensate pumping.